views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, my name is George Bodarky. I'm the news director of NPR affiliate station WFUV, located on the Rose Hill campus of Fordham University here in the Bronx. Each quarter, WFUV works to raise awareness of a particular issue through our Strike a Chord campaign. Past campaigns have focused on everything from healthy aging to autism acceptance to children in foster care. We're very pleased to be teaming up with BronxNet for our latest campaign focused on sustainability. New York City is taking several steps to reduce its carbon footprint, including proposals to retrofit buildings and to make more use of renewable energy. Our guest today is on the front lines of those efforts. Mark Chambers is director of the Mayor's Office of Sustainability. Mark, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
So what are the key principles of sustainability?
Well, it depends on how you look at it, but I would say that for the most part, the conventional principles revolve around energy, revolve around waste, and revolve around changing our built environment in a way that not only reduces our kind of dependency on some of the causes of the climate crisis, but also positions us to be able to thrive. I often say that fighting climate change is not about protecting our way of life, it's about changing the way we live. And so sustainability has a lot to do with being able to put in strong measures, policies and programs that help support that and help propel us forward in a way that's less carbon intensive so that we can really kind of peel back some of the problems that we're seeing now.
How much was Superstorm Sandy a few years ago a wake-up call for what you do in terms of improving sustainability? Absolutely.
I think that New Yorkers have Sandy in their recent memory, and being able to understand the prevalence of stronger storms, especially for coastal cities, what that looks like, and how a lot of U.S. cities are also experiencing extreme heat, experiencing flooding. The wake-up call is something that allows for us to recenter, refocus, and hopefully protect ourselves so that we are not experiencing the worst outcomes of those, but also redirecting our attention to make sure we are actively changing our behavior and actively pursuing measures that are really reducing our reliance on fossil fuels.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the top of the show, New York City is taking several steps to reduce its carbon footprint. What would you say are the initiatives at the heart of that?
Absolutely, and New York has been the spear tip of this effort for quite some time. We look at the work we do here, not just within the 5 boroughs, but extending beyond that. We are able to lead other cities to be able to mimic a lot of the work we're doing. Most recently, we worked with City Council to pass the Climate Mobilization Act, which is a series of really progressive efforts to change the way in which we're operating in New York City. One of the most fundamental anchors of that was a building performance mandate, which basically says for large buildings in New York City, buildings over 25,000 square feet, there is going to be a cap on the amount of emissions that those buildings could be responsible for. And the emissions are really the energy it takes to heat and cool those buildings, because that energy is responsible for the lion's share of emissions in our city. Across the board in New York City, buildings are responsible for about 70% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So it has to be at the core of any responsible and thoughtful climate response. So getting at the buildings, changing how we are heating them and keeping them cool is not just a first big step, but it's a giant step for other cities to follow.
I know that we are, of course, a city of buildings. There's probably, what, 1 million plus
There's a little
buildings?
over 1 million buildings, actually, yes.
Are people still surprised, though, to learn that buildings are the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, it's actually something that is a common occurrence, a common kind of conversation we have, that people don't really think about buildings in that kind of way. We have an intimate relationship with buildings. We wake up in them, we go to school in them, we go to work in them. But we don't think about the buildings as having a persona, like a role to play in our cities. And so when we have these conversations with New Yorkers, it's important for us to demystify that part about buildings and to make sure people understand that all of the components that allow for you to thrive or allow for you to be a part of this city, it happens and plays itself out in buildings. And so we have to take that seriously, but we also have to give New Yorkers very clear indication as to what they can do to make those buildings have less of an impact.
So what are those steps? What can they do?
Well, there's a lot. And I think there are day-to-day components, and then there's kind of larger aspects. So with buildings, big buildings in particular, what you're trying to do is to make sure you're looking at first, like where you are burning fuel on site. So that's the boilers, things that are keeping the hot water on, keeping the building warm, and being able to look at ways to retrofit those, make them operate better, upgrade them. A lot of these are antiquated and could benefit from being retuned, and the distribution of those pipes throughout the building. It's windows, making sure they are functioning well, making sure they're insulating well. It's roofs, making sure the roofs are also performing well. All of these components that you would think about just a well-operating building, thermostats that work and thermostats that make sure the building is not being kept too cool when their people are not there, or too warm when they're not there. All of those commonplace items, we have to have those moving across the city, across all buildings. And so those are some of the kind of early measures. I mean, one of the things to keep in mind, though, is that everyone benefits from better buildings. I think when we think about retrofitting these buildings, we just think about spending money, making sure that the buildings are operating better. But once they're operating better, they're costing less money to operate. So you have tenants that are happier because their buildings are more comfortable, and you have owners that are spending less money to operate their buildings. So we just want to make sure that we are doing that on an expedited time frame, because time is not something we have a lot of when it comes to really changing our behavior to reduce quickly our emissions.
A common complaint if you live in a New York City apartment in the winter is that it's so hot, I have to open the window.
Yes. Yeah, we want to get away from that, and I think part of that is making sure the systems are functioning the way in which they were intended. And that means that buildings that have those kind of problems, it can be retuned and they can be functioning better, and we know that that's going to make for happier tenants, but we also know it's going to make for more efficient buildings.
But if you're a landlord or a building owner and you're hearing this, you might be a little jittery. This is going to cost us money. So what is the city doing to help landlords, building owners meet these requirements?
Absolutely. So, I mean, again, first up, as I mentioned before, these are efforts that have paybacks. So your building operates better, your investment gets paid back. But one of the key ways in which the city and the city council has kind of pushed to make sure that building owners will be able to have the upfront capital to be able to invest is by passing a PACE financing bill. PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. And what it means is that a building owner could take out a PACE loan, which is a long-term low-interest loan. And a typical loan might be, let's say, like 7 years or so. PACE loans are actually determined, the length of it are determined based on what you're doing. So if it takes you 10 years to pay back the investment of changing your windows, that's how long the PACE loan is. And another part of this is that it gets paid back through your property taxes. So owners then will have a line item that's on their property tax bill that gets paid back over that time frame. It also stays with the property. So if you transfer the property to someone else, that investment that went in there then gets transferred over, and it stays with the property. So it's a great way for owners to not have to have the upfront capital, but to be able to make the necessary changes.
So we're talking about retrofitting here, but what about building from scratch? There was a recent headline that I think caused some confusion. Mayor de Blasio is banning glass buildings in New York City.
Right. So a couple things with new buildings. New buildings, in my opinion, I'm an architect, and so I feel like I can say this. New buildings are a little bit easier. Like when you're doing a new building, you have the benefit of using the kind of best decision making from the beginning, right? And putting time into planning and design in a way that allows you to design low energy buildings. We also have taken very significant care and effort to recraft codes in New York City. energy code, building code, zoning code, to make sure that all of these are pushing new buildings to be able to have very significant thresholds for their design so that they're performing better. So as far as new buildings are concerned, we're excited because we've put the work in to make sure that new building owners are doing a lot of the best that they can. Now, when it comes to glass, though, glass is a very interesting component because in general, glass, its thermal performance is typically less than a larger thermal mass. So if you have a large kind of, I use terms like thermal mass, but what it really means is if you have a well-insulated kind of thicker wall, it performs better thermally. It keeps things on the inside cold when they're cold, keeps things on the inside hot when they're supposed to be hot, and it uses less energy to do that. Glass does not have as great a performance when it comes to that. While there's been a lot of strides made forward in glass, one of the concerns that came about for the glass building ban and the conversation was glass buildings that are all glass, floor-to-ceiling curtain walls, as we call them, inherently they are kind of working against themselves. It takes much better attuned, operated, and kind of robust systems to keep a building like that cool or keep the building like that hot because of all the solar thermal gain that comes in. The sun is coming in from the outside. It means you have to have more air conditioning capacity on the inside to keep it cool, things like that. So what the glass building ban was really speaking towards was saying that we have for a long time been building buildings in the same way, these floor-to-ceiling curtain wall buildings, all glass, and we can do better. We can design buildings, which we're seeing now across the board, not just in some places in New York City, but in cities all around, that is transitioning to better, what we call glass and mass ratios, where buildings are beautiful buildings, amazing spaces from the inside, and still have abundant natural lighting, but are also taking advantage of other materials other than just glass. And so getting us out of our own way and being able to speak to a better consistency of design that uses better performing materials, mixing in with glass, mixing in with larger thermal capacities. It's how we build better buildings that function better and that are better to operate and better for people inside.
Are there existing buildings in New York City right now that are models for sustainability that you can point to?
Sure. I think that a lot of times it depends on the type of building we're talking about. But the Cornell campus, I think, is something that we speak to a lot about what we call kind of passive house design or low energy design, which I think is where buildings can be beautiful but also be high performing. I think that's a great example. But there are lots of examples, whether they are residential buildings or even some kind of larger buildings that are embracing these techniques in one way or another, using innovative solutions on the inside to also allow for pieces of their building to function much better.
You mentioned rooftops earlier and making sure rooftops are doing a good job to help this effort. What can we look to do on rooftops, because we have so many of them here in New York City, to make sure they are doing a good job for us in terms of helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
Absolutely. So rooftops are great spaces. I mean, in New York City, rooftops are often kind of coveted space. And so a lot of times you have large buildings with not as big a footprint. And so the rooftops usually have mechanical equipment and so forth, which is important for the building to operate. But rooftops can contribute so much towards protecting our city, in aggregate. So we talk a lot about heat island, which means that across the board for the city, because there are a lot of dark surfaces, whether they're roads or rooftops, sun hits that, makes the building a little bit warmer. Overall, it raises the temperature of cities. So we want to avoid that. And the way you avoid that is either by absorbing that differently with vegetated roofs, so green roofs, or reflecting it with cool roofs, which are white, kind of high reflectance roofs. So being able to do that in a way that takes advantage of those spaces is a huge way in which we can allow for buildings to kind of do their part. Another way is by looking at performance around solar and making sure that these buildings are taking advantage of some of that rooftop space to be able to provide for on-site energy generation. Part of the climate mobilization bills that we worked with council to pass included a solar and green roof bill, which means that every new building in New York City will have either solar or a green roof built into the building. That goes back to what I was saying about the benefit of new buildings. you can use the code, use our legislation to be able to enable them to work towards the benefit of all New Yorkers.
So besides solar, what other types of energy, clean energy, are you pursuing here in New York?
Well, I think it's important to understand that New York City is a very large energy user. You know, we, again, largest city in the country, we have a lot of energy needs. And so some of those needs can be met, you know, as we talked about with in-city generation, but most of it needs to come from outside of the city. And I think we also want to be able to effectively begin to turn off in-city generation that are some of the larger, dirtier power plants in the city. So we also have a rule that says that New York City has to be able to maintain within the city about 80% of its capacity or its need. So those are the kind of governing rules. In order to be able to make sure that is becoming cleaner, we have to basically say we are going to seek that low carbon energy elsewhere and bring it in directly into the city. So that means offshore wind, that means upstate renewables, and in recent kind of news, we've talked a lot about going a little bit further and seeking Canadian hydropower and directly connecting that into New York City. All of those are necessary for us to be able to clean our grid and to be able to move towards a carbon neutral future. So we're very excited about doing that. It also, you know, I think about it a lot the way I think New York thought about its water usage, you know, over 100 years ago. You know, and you know, of course, 100 years ago, you probably wouldn't want to go and you know, take a drink from the Hudson, and so you know, back then the conventional wisdom was let's begin to look for clean sources of water, you know, way upstate, bring, you know, large aqueducts down to make sure that New Yorkers were getting the clean water that they needed. And as a city that was growing at that time, that was critical to our kind of future. And it's the same thing goes for renewables and for clean energy. We need to be able to look at those conduits where we can bring them in, and we also need to look at the way in which they get here. You know, transmission is a huge part of this. And right now, a lot of the new renewables can't get to the city because the highways that bring them down are congested. And so for us, we're looking at ways now to say we want clean energy, we want that energy to come directly into New York City, and we want that energy to help us shut down in-city generation, clean up our kind of local air as it goes along with that, and benefit health-wise from having a much better system of bringing in clean energy and having less of these in-city generations turning on. We want them to turn off as much as possible.
So there might be a time where we will not have power plants within the 5 boroughs?
I believe so. And I believe that that is how we need to be planning and how we need to be advocating for our clean energy future.
I know that you have said if you want a lesson in sustainability, go to Governor's Island. What can Governor's Island teach us about sustainability, the island off of Manhattan?
Sure. So, you know, at that time when we were speaking about Governor's Island, one of the things that I was trying to get across in that conversation was it's always good to have places where you get a few bites of the apple of a conversation. One of the things I liked about Governor's Island was being able to have multiple ways and inroads for people to understand the larger work of sustainability. I think I was talking about the Billion Oyster Project as being one way in which New Yorkers can kind of connect with the health of the oceans and how that impacts the, you know, their own personal health. That's a conversation that lets you have an inroad to a conversation about our food systems. How are we looking at the intensity of our food systems, both from the resources that go into it, as well as the impact, you know? So you start to have conversations about that. Then you start to have conversations about the impact of plastics. You know, first having conversations like what are we doing to move us away from both single-use plastics as well as plastics that are fundamentally based from kind of virgin oil. All of those start to find different ways in which New Yorkers can relate. And so Governor's Island, I think, was a great example of being able to hit a few things at once, as well as it, you know, kind of gives you a good vantage to be able to, I think, have a kind of contemplative reflection back at the city. There are tons of other places in New York City that also kind of really kind of showcase great efforts and great movement forward. But I think that's always a fun one to be able to participate in.
Let's talk about single-use plastics for a moment. Single-use plastic bags are on their way out.
Absolutely.
In New York City. This is a big deal for you. I know this is a very important issue for you.
This is fundamental to any behavior change strategy. And to be honest, it's something that we would have liked to have seen a long time ago. We passed a kind of local law around single-use plastic bags several years ago. Now that we have gotten the assistance from the state, we're able to kind of really advance this quickly. What this means is that you're going to have this constant reminder and this constant effort about decision making. And, when you leave your house, you're going to grab your reusable bag. We have a program called Bring It, which is basically built around that. You're going to grab your reusable bottle, and you're going to go on living your life. And I think that people have gotten very used to the convenience of plastic bags, but none of us are used to the consequences. And so what I'm excited about is the conversation going away, because it's not a thing that we need to be doing anymore. We don't need to be taking plastic bags every time. We don't need to be overly using plastic straws. I do believe that straws have a place. We've been working very strong with the kind of the accessibility community to make sure that those that really need straws can have access to them. But it's also, for the most part, you don't need them. And so I think being able to do that, look at alternatives, silverware, the same thing applies. We're in a place now where it's 2019, like we can do better. And so I think that New Yorkers will quickly adapt, and I think that many cities around the country and the world have done this a long time ago, so we can do this.
What about charging 5 cents for paper bags?
So again, we have to play catch up, right? And playing catch up means that it's about reusable bags. It's not about what we call planned obsolescence, which is like the idea that something that you get is immediately of no more use to you, right? We can take a bag the same way we would use a paper bag or plastic bag, a reusable bag, canvas bag or other, and use it over and over again. So I think that part of what we are doing is saying, yes, plastic bags are particularly pernicious and particularly bad. Paper bags are also fruit from the same tree. We need to be using reusable bags consistently, and I think that we can quickly adapt and quickly catch up to the rest of the world that is moving away from it.
So you think we will be charging 5 cents? You think the city will move forward with that?
Well, I think time will tell what ends up happening. I think the implementation going forward next year of the bag ban will kind of see how we kind of adapt and move quickly. But I think that the faster we can move to a place where we are not using paper bags or plastic bags is better for New York.
So besides not using single-use plastic bags, what other steps can New Yorkers take to help your efforts in making the city more sustainable?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that I work on behalf of the 8.6 million New Yorkers that want a future free of carbon, right? A future that's also free of whether it's extreme heat or whether it is we talked about superstorms. All of these components go into, and speaking kind of frankly, also those are the same New Yorkers that want a freedom away from the social and kind of racial inequalities that make the truth of the climate crisis inconvenient for some, but very deadly for others. And so I think that we're in a place now where people want to be able to make the changes that they can make. And I think the best ways for individuals to start to think about that is to start to think about their consumption. What are they kind of consuming on a day-to-day basis that they can shift slightly to be able to have a larger kind of aggregated impact? And that may be about their reusable bags, may be about their reusable bottles. We did a program where we handed out reusable bottles as part of the Bring It program to every single New York City public high school student. So within a few days, we handed out 320,000 of these reusable bottles, water bottles. New Yorkers can also look at their consumption of meats. I think that moving in a way in which we are slowly starting to kind of shift away from a meat-intensive diet is something that will have a gigantic impact on our emissions.
City schools are moving to meatless Mondays,
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah, meatless Mondays across the board, which is fantastic. And I think, city government is also looking at reducing its purchasing of red meat, and we are we're moving in a place where no one is saying that all options are kind of like being taken away. It's like what we're doing is that let's make responsible decisions, let's look at the impact, and let's be able to make really strong collective decisions that prioritize our climate, prioritize the ability for everyone to thrive here in New York, and also, you know, take this climate crisis seriously. You know, it is very aggressive, and it's further along than a lot of people give it credit for. And to the extent that we can be proactive, but also, you know, activated. Like I think we're in a place now where we need activists. You know, we need New Yorkers to, yes, change your behavior, but you have to say that, like, I want to be a part of this, and I want to be an activist that is saying that this matters to me, and I am going to talk about it. I'm going to ask questions about it. I'm going to make sure that I am doing my research, and I'm going to do my part and to kind of hold everyone else accountable for that as well.
Soon enough, we'll be paying more to drive into Manhattan with congestion pricing. Is that more of a transportation issue or also an environmental issue?
So I think that we have to stop compartmentalizing anything related to the climate crisis. You know, it affects every part of the way we live. So whether it is transportation, whether it is strictly about greenhouse gases, whether it's just about, you know, shifting away from, you know, the internal combustion engine, like all of these things are now intertwined. So I think that as we move forward with congestion pricing, what we're going to see is it's not just about making it, you know, more pricey to come into the city. It's about engendering a shift where we are no longer kind of relying on the kind of norm of movement. You know, you should be able to, you know, take whatever means of transit best suits your task, you know, and to be able to do that, we also want more vehicles that are shared. We want vehicles that are electric. And so as we start to kind of move into a place where people are, the options are cleaner transportation, the options are shared transportation that are more efficient, that will also impact the role of congestion pricing. You know, I think that also speaks to efforts, you know, by the state to work on MTA and work on the subway system. That's also a key component of making sure that congestion pricing has its role, but it's not the only solution. And so I want to see a place where New Yorkers can kind of freely move in a way that is cost effective, but also relies on an electrified, clean energy-based transportation, you know, and we can kind of move away from this car-intensive culture. It also lets us get back some of these streetscapes. I mean, I'm a person that thinks a lot about, you know, what would this road be like without cars, period? And how do we have a conversation there about what opportunities open for New Yorkers when we reclaim some of those street spaces for people? And I think that's a conversation that a lot of kind of cities around the globe have started to really wrestle with.
I was going to ask you that question, whether you have any overseas role models.
Yeah, so we do. I mean, and we are in constant communication with global cities that are also leading the charge on this. You know, we are part of something that's called the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, which kind of takes some of the top cities that are really doing the best they can to reduce their impact and be innovative around it. And where it comes to role models, you know, you pull little pieces from everybody, right? That's one of the benefit. You know, we can look at how London has done their congestion pricing and learn from it and make changes so that we are not having any of the same problems that they may have had in early implementation or in kind of management. And we're looking at the successes that they have had and other people have had with reducing the impact of cars. You can look at the super blocks where they kind of have started to change how, you know, we had these kind of cross-cutting, you know, car networks, you know, in some other European cities, and they've now said, look, let's create these super blocks, make them pedestrian zones on the inside. You can still kind of circumambulate in vehicles, but we're going to give, you know, some of these streets back to people and then see what happens. And I think that what happens is that people fill those spaces and they start to be able to kind of like improve a lot of their economic output. They improve quality of life. And for us, it reduces the intensity, the carbon intensity of a culture built around cars.
All right, Mark, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for this special collaboration between public radio station WFUV and BronxNet, focusing on sustainability. I want to thank our guest, Mark Chambers, Director of the New York City Mayor's Office of Sustainability. If you would like to find out more about his office and its doings, check them out online, nyc.gov/sustainability. For more information about WFUV's Strike a Chord campaign, visit wfuv.org/strikeachord. I'm George Bodarky. Thanks so much for being with us.